So hey everyone, and welcome back to another Fight Chat Friday. We are TKD Coach Academy, Adrian Byrne and Richie Ford. And TKD Coach Academy is our attempt to shine a light on everything good about competitive ITF Taekwondo, coaching, practice and performance. So if that sounds like a conversation you'd like to engage in, make sure to pause the video here, hit the like button, make sure you subscribe and hit the bell button so you get the notification every time we have a new video for you. Richie, what are we talking about today?
Okay, so today's video is going to cover heavyweight versus lightweight. We're also going to have a look how this differs in male to female. So this was a suggestion by Giles Brown over on our Instagram story feature. So we just put it up looking for some suggestions, and we thought this would be a cool one to go back and forth. So there's going to kind of been the comparative vibe going on for the last couple of weeks. So versus A versus B, etc. So I think it would be cool to continue that on and just have a look at how the heavyweights differ from the lightweights. So just before we get into it, I just want to say thanks to TKD Techers for the use of some of their videos and of course the official ITF channel. So if you're looking for any good content from competition in particular, check out those channels. There's some good videos there. So just before we get into it, we'll just have a quick idea, list out the male divisions so we have a better idea what we're looking at. So we're going to be looking at some 57 and 63 in the lower weights and minus 85 plus 85 kilo in the heavier weights. Then on the female side of things, we're going to be having a look at some minus 50s and minus 56 kilos. And in the heavier weights, we're looking at minus 75 for the most part.
Yeah, a couple of 68s as well.
A couple of 68s as well. So they'd be kind of on the probably the heavier spectrum in terms of the females, bit taller and things like that. So you'd see range come into play and things like that. So some other things that we hope to expect is to see a difference in shots and techniques used, a bit of ring spacing, intensity, tempo, things like that. So the plan is to have a look at these things here and to see if these general assumptions stand up to that. So we're going to use some video hopefully to do that. So before Adrian goes through the actual topics we're going to cover today, make sure and give this video a like. It really helps us out with the YouTube algorithm. And what that does basically is puts our video out to other ITF practitioners. And that really helps to get the word out there and share our content. So that would be really good if you could do that. We would highly appreciate it. And also, just before we also cover our topics, today is the first time we're going to introduce our question of the day. So this week we put up the question feature again using Instagram, and this week's question comes from Owen O'Brien. So he asks, if there's a close fight, 15 seconds left, should the leader keep sparring as normal or become more defensive? So that's a very good question, and there's some good ideas that we have based on that. So we're talking a bit of game theory there and what you should do in the best scenario, etc. So stay tuned to the end of the video and we'll cover that question today. And if you have any questions, keep an eye on our Instagram and we'll have them up for next week as well. So before we get into all that, Adrian, will you just give us a quick overview of the topics for today?
Yeah, definitely. So we're going to have a look at the distance in the spacing and the distance between the opponents and we'll say the space that they occupy in the ring between the lightweight and heavyweight divisions, both on the male and female side. We're going to look at continuation, so the follow-up after the initial shot, and that kind of leads us down the road of what is the first shot and what are the preferred shots for the follow-up. We'll look at the preference for the initial technique and then what impact that has on the stance that people adopt and the body positioning that they adopt as well. From the point of view of footwork, we're going to look at how the different weight categories, divisions, male, female, use their footwork to create intensity and how that looks across the different divisions. And as I said, finally, we've probably touched on this, but the way that you enter into an engagement, what the first shot is, how the front leg is used, and the preference for going to hands, that's definitely going to come up repeatedly throughout our discussions. So, yeah, we'll jump right into it with a little bit of lightweight female sparring. So what we really wanted to focus on here is just when you look at the ring and the amount of space that's available, there really is a lot of work to be done to line up a shot that can score. So we have Silvia and Katy here in the final in 2017 of the minus 50 senior female, and this is early doors. There's the match is level at this stage, and the girls don't have to engage if they don't want to. They can choose to give space and go 1-for-1. And I think an awful lot of what goes on here is a setting of a rhythm. So in the same ways you might set a rhythm with footwork in some of the other divisions as well. Here it's setting a rhythm, I think, with the carrying of the front leg, with the amount of space that you take. And then, you can push the same distance, retreat the same distance. And then what the girls will do is they'll decide, okay, I'll spoil or I'll interact with that front leg, or I'll carry further, or I'll drop the leg, short lift and go again. And they can basically vary the rhythm off the front leg to get that first initial engagement to happen on their terms. And I think that's one of the things that's very kind of like a signature feature of some of the lighter divisions, particularly on the female side of it.
Yeah, I think that's spot on, especially if you think of it just logically. These girls cover up much less space in the ring. So the amount of space they have behind them is probably a mat or two extra than what we will see in particularly with like the likes of the plus 85 men.
Yeah.
Once they take a step back, it's a much bigger distance that they're going, and they're much closer to the edge. So what you would expect is more warnings and more exits to be happening in those heavier weights, but we actually might get into that a little bit later. But because, as you mentioned, the whole idea of carrying and bringing that leg into contact with the first initial shot from the lighter weights and the speed that they can do that at, I think it actually is more frequent in the lighter weight divisions to see more exits, because that intensity, which we'll also look at later on, is just ramped up a little bit more. And when you get people on the back foot, it can be quite difficult to get off that straight line with the speed that people are coming at, and as well with that whole idea of the carry versus direct shots. And then when you couple that with coming at angles, coming at different rhythms, and including footwork and different steps, I think that it's actually something that's very, very interesting. Before that we had a look at these videos, I would have said, okay, it makes common sense here to say the bigger guys take up more space and the bigger girls take up more space, so therefore they should probably exit the ring more often.
Yeah, and it really just doesn't look like that. No, yeah. And I mean, I think the initial point just from that first clip is that you will often see this exchange, this tit-for-tat exchange with the front leg, and it's a different way from what maybe if you're living in the middleweight categories where, you look at the average spar, it's a different way of setting rhythms. So usually you're setting rhythms off of footwork feints and, the amount of shots that you throw, or we'll say the distance maybe that you move on your first shot. But it's really more pronounced here, I think, with the lightweights, because there's so much room behind them, because the option is there when the scores are level and, it's early in the match. You can set a rhythm with picking up that front leg and carrying over a particular distance, and how much you withdraw, how much you change the angle before you go again. There's a rhythm set there, and one of the things that we'll always teach people to do is to set a rhythm and then break it to your own advantage. And that's what the lightweight girls are doing with the front leg. They're setting their own rhythm, so then they can break it to their own advantage later. So one of the things I wanted to pick out is that, again, and very often as well with the flexible girls, which is very, very common in the lightweight divisions, there will be clashes or interactions between the legs. And there's a little bit of a difference between this and the heavier weights, where often in the lighter weights, they will look to directly counter. So the hook kick around the leg, is a very, very common strategy that's taken, because the chamber carries high. Maybe because there's a tendency for them to be more flexible, there's room under that chamber to take the hook kick around to the head. And that's one of the ways where, you can decide, right, we're actually going to engage on this particular shot rather than continue the rhythmic change of distance. And we can see it here for, and again, we've just picked the same fighters just to keep the point very clear, where you're kicking for advantage. You're looking to maybe break the chamber, and then there's a follow-up potentially that's possible. Where when we see the same clashing with the heavyweight girls later, it's more of a spoiling. It's to stop the person from taking space from you. And then, yes, sometimes you'll end up in a better position and come into hands. But I think what we see more with the lighter weight girls is that it's, there is an attempt at the score, and there is very definitely take down that front leg so that they can't carry on, create that pressure, and get into a direct line where the scores will build.
Yeah. What I found actually looking through some of the videos, especially on the male side, was the lower the weight category, the more preference there was to initiate with legs and preferably keep going with those kicks and to use and build your scores with that and then supplement that with hands. On the flip side, the heavier guys tend to favor initiating just with something off the front leg that closes the distance and then using the hands to set up all their scores and hopefully supplement that with a kick to finish, for example. So do you think that's a similar feature in the female side?
Yeah, I mean, the carrying off the front leg is common to both, but as you said, with the heavier weight divisions, it doesn't tend to be the middle high type of carry or the middle high type of carry. It tends to be middle or middle in a single step and then kick, or short kick with the first one with a follow through, and on the second kick to, again, whether it's to get to hands. There tends to be a little bit of a lot of the time with the heavier weight females that if they're going to go to the head, it's often a direct single shot from a closer distance. If they're going to go to the body, it'll be the 1-2, it'll go to the body, and then it's hands before going for the headshot as a finish. So definitely think that's something that is distinctive between the weight classes, and obviously that's all going to blur in the middleweights to some degree as well. I would expect.
There's a bit of a mix and match there, and we'll actually see that as well later on. That there's something to be said for mixing and just taking the best bits from each one. But for example, we're going to be having a look today as well at Julio Carlos, and he's an example of a guy that really pushes that pressure off the front leg, and he's really direct and really explosive, bringing that leg to you. And that's an example where he's using that kick and he can then transition body or head, because I guess the lighter guys, they have the speed on their side, and as well just biomechanically their body is just a little bit tidier to carry everything a little bit more fluidly, I guess. Whereas with the bigger guys, it can be not the case, where being able to carry that big mass, I suppose, over a distance is much more difficult. And here we're going to look at some shot preference, especially in the male side. So you'll see the bigger guys tend to favor just squeezing that pressure gradually to get to the hands, whereas these are the lighter guys here, and they're using lots of testing footwork, and they prefer to initiate with the front leg here to get everything going, and then once they find an opportunity from the front leg, then they can try break that line and get in on the hands like we see right here. And that's kind of one of the features, I think, in the heavier versus light guys. Here as well, I have to say that the light guys are able to transition very, very quickly from going from hands to legs, where the bigger guys will tend to punch 2 or 3 times extra before they have that ability to get their balance, set their feet, and kick.
I think they're looking for a bigger distance as well, aren't they? When they're looking for to create a bit of space with the hands to get the leg up there.
Yeah. And we'll have a look at continuation as well in the girl side, but I think for the lads, the lower weights, they're much faster to be able to get to the kicks and transition between kicks and punches, as opposed to the big guys here, where you can see the techniques are like they want to punch that little bit longer, as you can see in that last clip, and I think that's a big thing. As well as I said, I feel that the legs are what is the main predominant idea for the smaller guys, and then it's supplemented with hands. For the bigger weights, I feel like it's mostly coming from hands and then supplemented with kicks as well. So I think, of course, there's some people who break this mold, but generally they're using the legs to get to the contact and initiate with the smaller weights, like we see here, using that leg to get in close, and then the hands will be supplementing all that good pressure and distance control. You see the same here as well with Fatih. He's trying to get in on the hands, and then you see the kicks will be supplemented in.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said as well for the idea that we say at the heavier weights, they're more likely to stand and engage a little bit, which means that you can throw a shorter front leg that doesn't carry so much, that's likely to actually get you into the engagement range and use the hands. Whereas I think for the lighter weights, there's almost
there's the carry, for example.
Yeah, you almost need to pin the person on the back, on the edge of the ring, or at least commit them to a backward movement. And I think that's something we have a couple of clips to illustrate with the girls. But it's definitely there for the lightweight guys as well, where you need to commit someone to a backward movement before you can open out sometimes with those straight line shots, and and get the person in a position where they can't move away, float away really at the lighter weights, if you like.
Yeah.
And engage differently. So
I think as well, actually, before we move on, just on the last point, that the body position in here, if we look at the big guys, look at their body position. They're closer to full facing than they are half facing, and that all comes back to the idea of preferring hands. Whereas here we see Karl almost full facing. And then we have here as well with Bartek. He's looking to get to that hands and come right through like a truck. So he doesn't want to be too side onward. Look at the small guys here, because they prefer to initiate with the legs. You see, it's much more side facing, and that is much easier to get off your side kicks and things like that. Although these guys are big guys, they're still initiating with the legs a little bit. But you'll see the difference there of the body position being able to interchange. Whereas for me, generally, the lighter the weight, the more side facing it will be. And I think that actually increases the distance between people.
But you can also push differently once you change your stance to that more side facing stance, you can actually cover greater distance going sideways. But
and carry more, I guess.
Yeah. But it does change your shot selection. Maybe if we have a little bit of a look into the that entry shot, we can kind of expand on that point.
Yeah, so like when you look at that entry shot, like you're going directly to the hands here, but because of the distance being a little bit closer, you can do so. And of course, the bigger guys, obviously, their limbs are longer as well. So because of that, like it's easier to get into range with hands as opposed to maybe 57s or 63. It just might be a little bit tougher because they have to initiate with the legs a little bit more. Here you see the choice of entry shot from Sebastian here. It's not really a carry. They're looking to both use their front leg to just close that distance slightly. But then once that distance is closed enough, you're looking to hands, and that's where they want to get their big scores here. And the bigger guys are happy to get into that. You can see here again from Bartek, he's just closing that pressure gradually. Whereas here on the other guys, you can see that, right, they're happy to be at a further out distance and use their speed and that front leg to break into the distance and then get to work after that.
Yeah, so let's shake this up a little bit and have a look at it on the female side of it, where, again, these aren't particularly heavyweights. This is 68, so it's very much one of our middleweight divisions, but the girls tend to be, taller. They tend to be up around that kind of 5'9", 5'10", versus the 5'1", 5'2" at the 50s, and we can see, like, as I said, the same thing is what you're seeing with the guys, where there's less of a light pickup carry and these are the 75s, but there's a shortening of the distance first with that back leg stepping in. So even though the front leg hasn't moved yet, when they disguise that back leg stepping in, as Louise does there, it does change it, and that makes it the tendency for it to be one shot or a direct shot, or maybe a quick one, and I think you see that more as you go up the divisions, and some of that is going to be just the leverage of it. I mean, if your legs are as long as Maeve McGee's there, or Isabelle Schander, you probably need to change your center of gravity and your leverage to get that leg step up. That's what it is
for me. I think the center of gravity is important,
and you need to make that very quick shortening, or the disguised shortening of the stance. And I think that's a big part of the game when it comes up into the heavier weights, that you have to be able to get that front leg up without being stepped through. And you can see there's an interplay between, can I disguise that shortening step to get my front leg into play? And if I don't disguise it, or if I don't disguise it well enough, you'll often find that the heavier weight girls are, and it's I think very much the same with the guys, they're stepping through it. They're meeting it in the middle, and they're directly countering on the straight line. So it's like, okay, it's a mechanical necessity that I need to shorten it, but I need to hide it also, because if I don't hide it, the distance is that little bit closer, and I'm going to get cut off. So I think.
I also think that in the heavier you go, the more steps you'll find on things. So people will step on kicks more, step on punches.
Yeah.
I almost use that kind of like a spare jab off the front hand. You see Lyndsey used it well here in one of our clips. But then when you go down, there's very little stepping in the weights. It's a lot of lifting and shifting and using your footwork correctly to get in, because I just think that you can't get away with it at the lower weights because the speed is just a little bit quicker and the intensity. So if you step, you're going to be easily countered, and people might step through. But because at the heavier weights, just that the intensity is just a little bit more gradual, and the pressure is just a little bit more gradual. I think that you can get away with it a little bit more.
So let's continue on the idea of that, intensity and the footwork, and looking at some examples here of how it's used differently. And we can see Vitali here in this one with the preparatory movements.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's it. Like the bursts of intensity is very important here, where you can see they're both setting it up. Here you look at the heavyweights. Look at the pressure is constant and gradual from Bartek, and very, very patient. Where you don't see that in the lightweights. And again, the body position has a little bit to do with this. Here is back to the lightweights, very intense and very direct, where there's not much patience in this build-up. Like Julio's using all his physical attributes here of being explosive. Same in the -85 here, just a little bit more patient, a little bit more testing. And they're just trying to see, can they get through that line. For me, I think the line is a little bit straighter in the heavier weights. Here you can see it's almost always on a straight line, whereas the lighter weights for me are able to pull angles a little bit more. And I don't mean just like circling, because like everybody in ITF Taekwondo can circle and use the ring really well. I mean the straight line that the fight happens at. Like here you go, everything here is straight line with the big guys. Whereas we might see a clip in a second from Vitali where he's able to pull off angles left and right and still score at those angles. I think that's a big difference here. So we might see it here actually, where he's actually using lateral movement, moving left, moving right, and then he's still able to pull off shots to come back on and off that line. I think that's like here we see with a good shot, where here the straight line is very, very evident in the heavier weight, so it's a bit more linear. And I think that's something that's very obvious in the plus 85s at least.
Yeah, I think there's an element as well there where as much as you can have some of the heavyweights who are well able to move, well able to carry the leg and so on. I think the lighter you go, the better they can disguise whether they're initiating with the hand or foot. And Vitali's a great example of that one, but Anis Trickery would have been a good example as well. And there's Thomas is a good example in his own right, where the body position doesn't betray so much which is going to start the hand or the foot. And when you have that and that choppy kind of rhythm that they favor, and the ability to change the angles a little bit, it does change it. Whereas there's no way Bartek is going to, kick to the head from where he is. His body position does not allow it. If he tries to kick to the head from there, what's going to happen is it's going to be a big obvious one and his opponent's going to read it. So, it's setting it. But going back to your very first point in terms of like that, that steady mooching is, we used to call it in Ireland, that just mooching in. Credit Master Cooley for that one. But what you're doing is you're creating tension and pressure within the fight, but in two different ways. So rather than trying to set a rhythm that is uncomfortable for your opponent by accelerating the tempo and then breaking it to your advantage, you're creating a rhythm that's uncomfortable for your opponent by slowing the tempo and using that to your advantage. By going that slowly, they don't know when the right time is to kick, and you're always steady on your feet, so you can always react and interact with it. Whereas at the higher tempo stuff, if they interrupt your high tempo, sometimes you're just mid movement and you're caught. So, there's a style thing that's not necessarily about, the physical size of the person, but the mentality as well of how you want to create your pressure.
I think that this actually comes back to what we mentioned earlier as well, of the shots that are preferred. Yeah. I mean, it goes back to your point. Like if the heavier guys were more side facing and those headshots were in play more, it wouldn't be the case, I think, where people would just kind of almost settle in their position and just kind of wait. Like you see it in the clips that we picked out. The smaller guys, like the pressure is there with their footwork, but it's not as obvious as it is with the bigger guys. It's very gradual and very constant with the bigger guys. It's obvious that it's there. Whereas the little change of footworks and steps and test steps and coming back out, push, pull, things like that, I think that's a big difference in the lower weights that maybe to the casual watcher or to the naked eye, for some people, it mightn't be as obvious that pressure is building. And while you're in there, that pressure also isn't as obvious. You might feel pressure in a second and push, pull, push, pull. And I think that that's actually something that's very, very interesting and very high level in the likes of the 57 and the 63s.
Definitely. I want to jump into some of the kind of, again, we'll go into the shot selection, but we'll look at that continuation thing as well. Because all of this that we've been talking about so far really is about the how do you get your first shot off? You know, sometimes it's the how do we get there? And I think, you know, in terms of looking at the female divisions, you have totally different ways of getting to that first shot, you know, but it's the what happens next. And, you know, we can look at two clips between the slightly heavier weights and the slightly lighter weights, but it's that continuation, forcing your opponent to move in a predictable way, so a way that you're happy with, that's where the actual big scores happen, you know. And we can see Lyndsey straightening the line there against Adelina and getting the back leg in. And then combination shots here that, you know, it's back leg and Adelina there from back leg and downward kick into front leg. The continuation after the shots is definitely the point, you know, and even in that clip you have okay, here's one direct shot, score to the head, but the return is hands to turn and kick to, you know, away we go again. And once you can commit your opponent to a particular position or a particular direction of movement, it opens out shots. And I think that's a big factor, and it changes. It works quite differently, you know, depending on less so the size or the weight category, and more so the range of shots or the nature of the competitor. And I think that's while the principle is the same, you get your first engagement shot in, and then you look for your continuation. The choices change. What your first shot in is then leads to different continuation, because are you half facing in a punching you know, kind of form?
Of course, it's much easier to punch on the move as well as to kick.
Yeah.
You know, and when we think about it logically, the heavier the weights, more center of gravity involved, further away they are from the ground.
Yeah.
Less balance, which means that's probably why that I noticed in the males in particular, that the heavier the weight, the less speed they were able to get to the kicks when they went to punches.
And the continuation is almost finishing to head after hands, still going forwards. It's very rarely in an exit with a headshot or with a spinning kick or something like that.
Exactly, yeah. I think that, did you find that as well on looking at the female side of things, that the lower weights were able to get to the kicks a little bit faster when they were going in continuation with the hands?
Yeah, but I think it's a huge thing is because they don't have to go forward. So with the heavier ones, unless they got forward momentum, they didn't usually get back to the legs.
Ah, okay.
Whereas with the smaller ones, it's like there's the exchange that happens with hands, and if it means you can kick going forwards, they'll go forwards. If they can't go forwards, they'll go back. And they'll tend to find that back kick or the switch dolio or the anerio from close or something that they can do to exit. Whereas, you know, at the heavier weights, it tended to be you go to hands, but if the pressure doesn't yield distance, the follow up with the legs doesn't happen as much.
Right, getcha.
So just bringing back onto that particular one, you know, you can have matches go for a particular period of time without any major scoring until you can force someone onto the direct line or deny them movement. And this is the 56 senior female, I should say. And, you know, you can see the work that's done to put the person in a particular line of movement. So to get them moving in a particular way so that you can predict where they'll be, you can open up. And typically you just need them moving towards you or away from you in a straight line, you know, as you open up your shots. Or, of course, you pin them on the edge of the ring. So either one will do. But both Jenny and Mira in this clip, you know, do a very good job, you know, of making that happen. And, you know, I think it's interesting as well, because we were just talking about that point in terms of the exit. You can see Jenny gets here, but the hands have stopped, and it's like, okay, now we have the back kick and
it's a good example of it.
Yeah, and then, you know, from Mira's point of view, it's like, okay, she managed to force the distance so much in that straight line, it took away Jenny's shot, you know. So I do think that's one of the things that you'll see, particularly in the lightweights, that, you know, there is 1 to 3 punches, and then generally speaking, there's an opportunity to build the score. And the punches create the space, but then the kicks are always the big obvious scores.
Would you agree with the point that in terms of, for me, for the lads, the bigger weights favor the straight line more? Do you
Yeah.
think that even in the female, the lower weights still try to get you on that straight line?
I think they want you, that they'll use circular movement in order to set up the engagement. But the big scores happen when the person moves back in a straight line. And I've often kind of said that, when I'm coaching, I'll say to people, it's like anyone who trains on pads, okay, and we can go into the whole other debate about how much you train on pads or not, is another thing. But anyone who trains on pads can do every combination they've ever learned going in a straight line that way. Very, very rare that the pads move like a real human being and a combination is trained. So once you move back in a straight line, all of a sudden that, if you want to call it muscle memory, but that pattern recognition is going to kick in. And it's like, oh, I have a moving target in a straight line away from me. Every combination I've ever learned works here. So I think once you create that straight line movement, it affords the other person the opportunity to flow. And that's where the scores will come.
Igor Masimenko comes to mind when you say that. When he was getting people on the back foot there, he was landing 3 and 4 shots and big shots. So you see some of his highlight videos from back in the day, and I'm sure there's a lot of other fighters in the same. But
I think Timothy Boss right now is an animal for that as well. Like, if you move back in a straight line, the shots just keep coming. They keep coming. Julio's been posting some really lovely stuff over the last while, just a little bit of kind of like a pick me up and I miss competition kind of stuff, I suppose, a little bit. But when you look at some of the best looking shots, the ones that everybody would like to watch, the highlight clip of, it creates that movement, where there is a predicted movement. The person's moving away from you or towards you in a straight line, and it opens up the combination, because that's what we want. Where it's hard to hit someone is where they can move and flow, where they've got options and they can go back, left, right, or through. Then it's very hard to commit to your combination. But once their chin is up and they're leaning back, or they've planted their weight into their back foot, or there's a backward step, or even from a defensive point of view, they've made that step forward. It's like, well, you're committed now. You can't change your line. You're coming this way. Now my counter works. Now my follow-up works. And so it's really about what you do to get that situation to develop. And as you said, what we're seeing is that with the lighter weights, it often involves more, changing the rhythm with those longer distance, more flicky front leg kind of stuff to get the person to misstep. That lets you engage and do the things you want to do. Whereas at some of the heavier weights, there's the shortening step, the more direct shot that's looking to take you to hands, and it's the hands that give you the direct line. So
almost kind of capitalizing on mistakes a little more in the lower weight divisions, I think.
And
almost setting you up.
And so from that point of view, maybe patience and a deeper understanding of rhythm is needed to do that at some of the lighter weights.
Yeah. And I think that actually is a nice segue onto some of the renegades that we put together of some people who might be in the lightweight divisions but fight big at sometimes, and vice versa. And just as you said, I think Jamie Williams is a good example of that. He's somebody who really has that relaxed tempo, and then when he needs to go, he goes. Which is very it's almost like a heavyweight characteristic and a trait, really. Here we see Hang Louis, who's like just bursting through people like as if he's 100 kilos, and I think that there's a lot to be said for that, being able to pull bits and pieces from each end of the weight spectrum and to create your own little mold, because what works and what doesn't work works because it doesn't work, if that makes sense. Here we see Jamie like very patient, very gradual. Do you know what I mean? He's picking his moments very wisely, and Jamie's very successful. Then he goes to work. That's very, very common of a big guy. Here we see then the minus 85, some people we used in this, Amin and Danilo, fighting like the two of them are 50 kilos, running around the place. You know what I mean? So I think that here we have Zook, who's he's 70, but he's not the tallest. But there he is fighting, running through the other guy like a truck, fighting as if, again, he's 100 kilos, So I think that having traits from opposite end can be very, very valuable, because what you're used to and what you see on the other side commonly in your division, then when something comes up different, it's almost like a blurb in your brain for a second. You're like, whoa, what was that? And you just kind of almost get caught in the hop. And I think it's actually one of the reasons why team sparring can be so exciting and so enjoyable for people as well.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
You know what I mean? Because it's like you fighting somebody who's not in your weight division. It works differently. And we used Hong there as an example. Hong for a long time fought at minus 70 and won the Euros 2019 at 70, very successful.
Yeah.
But when he was at 78, he didn't find that same success. And I actually feel that that might be a factor, the fact that he fights like a big guy.
There wasn't enough contrast.
Going up to 78, they're more used to that because they are bigger guys. So like fighting them like bigger guys actually suits them a little bit more. And it didn't play to Hong's advantage then as a result. So I think it's something to think about, that being like almost a renegade in your division and having little factors to pull from the opposite end can be very, very effective.
And even as simple as having training partners that don't all fight in the mold, shall we say, that like, as I said, for us in Ireland, like we went a very, very long time without many heavyweights. And so most of our heavyweights trained in the club environment and even at national team with middleweights in particular, and often with even lightweights and microweights. So, you know, that would be a very, very common thing for us, you know, down the years.
Yeah, I mean, like I fought a plus 85 for a long time. And my main training partner was Thomas, who was like 57 kilo fighter.
Sure.
I mean, that's the opposite end of the spectrum, but then that gives you some advantages in its own right. For me, I felt that there was nobody in the plus division that was like fast enough in terms of like being able to put me under very intense pressure on the straight line, like we talked about earlier.
Sure.
With that carrying of the front leg and things like that. And then on the flip side, I'm sure that in terms of Thomas, he is able to stand there with people and almost not fear him in a way, because he has that ability to stand with the bigger guys and see
he knows
that
when to go through
constant pressure that we talked about on the flip side.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, you know, it's like from the point of view of looking at someone like Jamie, where, you know, it's choosing to play the game on its win condition rather than on, you know, there's a million and one ways to spar. And you can choose that, okay, I'm going to win by scoring more points than you. And like you go back to, you know, football analogies or whatever, there are teams that have been effective without always being the most like explosive. And, you know, over the years, people love watching an explosive team that scores lots of goals. And it's the same in Taekwondo. You often love watching an explosive fighter who is always dynamic, always doing things. But they often just also lose a high-scoring match. And so...
Yeah, knowing how to win is just as important, if not more important. Like,
yeah, and sometimes, you know, we look at that. You don't want to lose to... you know, a match that or lose a match that you predict you should win. Like if you think, I have a solution for this particular competitor, you don't want to, you know, all of a sudden find, look, I just didn't get the return, or the headshots didn't land, or they traveled rather than get hit and things like that. So there's a different element at play there, and, you know, different strategies can yield results. And, you know, it's been very interesting for us in terms of the duels at 57 that we've had in Ireland, you know, where you have very, very different fighters between the guys that are there.
But like, look at it. If you think about it, he's playing it into his favor. So, of course, he's going to have an advantage in that. Because, like, if you come out like a kamikaze guy in 57 and you're going bull rushing people like crazy, you're going to probably get a little bit of success because it's not the norm. Now, you'll probably run into shots and things like that. But it will be very difficult for people until they begin to get used to that. And like when we talk about Jamie there, being able to use your strengths, which is not common in his division, it doesn't make sense for him then to go in and fight like all the other 57s, because he has that massive advantage. So I think that's something to really be focused on and think about.
Yeah, for sure. So do we want to jump into our question of the day? As it's
that's a good segue, I think, of game state and things like that.
Yeah, why not? So our question today came from Owen O'Brien 20 on Instagram, and we happen to know Owen, so that's no problem. But the situation is we have a close fight with 15 seconds left. Should the leader keep sparring as normal or become more defensive? So do you want to start the ball rolling on that one?
Yeah, so we're looking at things almost game theory like here, I suppose. Which option do you weigh up? And I think it all comes back to the game state, which is very, very important. And because now we have the clear scoreboards and things like that, it makes it much more practical to have a correct decision here.
Yeah.
Whereas before, back in the day, without scoreboards, without live scoring, like this is a big gamble and you're not so sure. Now it's very obvious what the score is, what the time is left, and things like that. But some things that you must consider. First of all, you need to consider how many points are you up by. I mean, 15 seconds, like it's very possible to get a couple of shots in 15 seconds, especially when the intensity is being increased. Also, you got to look at the game state in terms of the warnings on the board. If you step out of the ring, is this going to flip the score? So if you're only 1 point up, and by stepping out, it gives you a third warning, sixth warning, for example, and then it brings it back to a draw or you lose. So that's something that it's worth knowing, and it's not very easy to do that in a short space of time. This is where your coach comes in heavily, I think, and is very, very important that they understand the scoreboard and they're able to communicate that information with you very, very clearly and very, very quickly. Because that's a split second decision you need to make. Am I going to continue to spar? Am I going to hold the center of the ring? Am I going to play down the clock? You've got many options. Then, of course, you kind of look, when you get more advanced, you can kind of look at things like some referees take almost 10 seconds to give a warning. That plays into the factor as well.
You got to know your referee at that stage.
You got to know your referee. Is it somebody who's quick and snappy, gives the decision and they're gone? Is it somebody who takes a long time? Like, then you get a bit of playmanship. So you get maybe walking around the referee, winding down the clock, and then you get brought back to your position again. If you exit and it was only your second warning, for example, you come in, you kind of walk around, you're wasting time. So it really does depend on the situation and the game state. So knowing that is quite important. But to hit the nail on the head very quickly, should you stand and continue to fight, or should you be more defensive? I think the best option with 15 seconds to go, if we're talking about a pretty close match, for example, I think the best option is to put up defenses, good high guard, and just fence back. Use that front leg. Try not to concede space and just be super hard to hit. I think actually just going backwards is not a great option. No. I think having like a high fence in terms of your guard and your front leg might be a better option, and then use that breaking momentum to move off to another space in the ring. But just running and avoiding, I think usually, from what I've seen, it usually doesn't end up so well.
Well, everyone wants you to lose then as well, which is the thing. Like, and it's in the nature. The crowd will turn against you, other than your own supporters maybe, and the referees will turn against you a little bit, because you know it is gamesmanship, and you want, when someone is engaging in gamesmanship, you want them to feck up. So for me, the other thing just to consider is that there's a psychological component of it as well, which is that you know there's 15 seconds left, your opponent knows there's 15 seconds left, and you're both experiencing opposite ends of the same pressure wave kind of thing. And you can use that to your advantage. They need a score. So you can give them seemingly what they want. You can show them the score that they're going to go and look for. So if you've been sparring someone who's looked to blitz you, or who's looked to carry the front leg into, you can give them that shot or show them that shot, and as you know it's coming, because they're under pressure, and in a pressured state they'll take the most trained decision. So if their go-to shot under pressure is that they're going to push front leg at you, okay, no problem, let's stay on a straight line and offer them that, so that when the leg comes up you can break the straight line, or you can take that counter, or if you have that warning to spare, you can change legs and spin under, or whatever it happens to be. That by offering them what they subconsciously want and need, they'll grab for it because they're under that pressure. So we can use that, as I said. So particularly building the pressure by putting up the fence, denying the time, letting the clock count down, let someone start saying 10, 9, 8, etc. in the background, ramps up that pressure on them. And then when they suddenly see the front hand is carried low, the weight's on the front leg, the blitz is there, and then you suddenly step in, or you change, you slip hook, and come off the line of it. It's like, it's brutal, because it is exactly what they want. They can't help themselves but take it, and then it's exactly what you asked them to do. You've lined it up for them. And when you see someone do that in practice, you won't even know that they've done it. It'll seem like it's in the natural flow of things, but they're going to be relaxed, because they're going to be working on their terms, their inflow. And I think that's a huge part of like being able to make those decisions involves being in that position repeatedly. And
that's just what I was going to bring up next.
You're not going to be in enough tournaments to be in that position over and over again within a short enough space of time for it to be learnable.
Although it happens very, very frequently at the high level. Like the chances are most matches at like international championship level, at least from like quarterfinals on probably, or even you probably get 2 high level people in the first round potentially. But chances are it's going to come down to one person is up by a score or 2 and there's 20 seconds to go. Like that is going to be the case most of the time.
Yeah.
And I think that putting yourself in that position, like that is something that in my club that we practice very often, of having to chase that to get the lead and to keep the lead. And I think that practicing is very important because it's a very, very common occurrence, especially at the high level, as I said. So being able to kind of almost have an understanding of what you do and what you like to do, what you're comfortable at and what you're good at in those situations. Like on the flip side of that, what is your go-to shot? What is the shot that you're most comfortable that if you have to bet the house on it, that you'd be able to pull that off? Like just knowing that and knowing what one you're going for that is something to be said for in its own right, you know?
Yeah, and even having a good sense of how long 15 seconds is, 20 seconds is, like how much action can you do? And sometimes, and this is one where, like, you know, jumping back to Jamie, you know, you can find yourself in a position where you have that left and you know what you need to get. And actually what you're playing is you're playing the other person's ability to take that warning. You want to, like, so if you know you have 20 seconds left and you need to catch them and they've only 1 warning on the clock, you know, maybe, or on the board, maybe you need to like force an early warning before you even go looking for your score to take away that option for them to take a warning later. Because if 10, 12 seconds go by and they still have 2 warnings left, they can definitely run down the clock by, you know, exiting, falling, throwing a spin that misses and they land in their butt, whatever. And, you know, so really recognizing what can you do in that time? What kind of pressure can you create? Can you, starting from the center of the ring, put your opponent in a corner and be in a position to build a score? You know, and all of these things are things we can create scenarios around and train so that we make the decisions better under pressure.
Definitely. I think that's it. You got to be able to put yourself in the situations that you want to be, I suppose, proficient in.
Yeah.
And you can't just turn up and expect you to be able to pull out all the shots and all the stops on the competition day when the intensity is high, pressure is high, and for both competitors, and you think that maybe this is the first or second time you've put yourself in this situation, then you're not going to probably be able to do it to your full potential. So you have to be able to put yourself in that situation time and time again, trial and error, learn what works, what doesn't work, adjust, and go back to the drawing board. So then when it does come up, first of all, I've been here before, I know what to expect. And second of all, you have a little bit of an idea of your best go-to and what works best for you.
Definitely. So that's probably a good point to end our video today. So again, for anybody who's watching, if you've liked the video, please do click the button and say you liked it. If you have any comments for us, we'd love to see them in the comments below. And if you have ideas for next week's Fight Chat Friday, again, we'd love to hear those in the comments below or through Instagram, any way at all of getting in touch with us. That would be great.
Yeah. And as well, we'll throw up the question feature again before next week's video. So if you have any suggestions or any questions there that you'd like to get in, we'll try to do this feature from now on of having a question for each episode. So I think it'd be really cool as well to get people involved who watch the videos frequently. So yeah, be sure to get involved there, and we'll see you in the next one.
See you now.